They said Ghost was gone forever. But what if the man everyone saw die never really died? What if the greatest player in the Power universe had one more move left hidden in a single letter meant only for Tommy? A letter that changes everything we thought we knew about Ghost's death. This isn't just a message from the grave, it's a blueprint for revenge, rebirth, and redemption. When Ghost fell from that balcony, it felt like the entire Power universe stopped breathing. The man who built an empire from the shadows, who balanced between loyalty and betrayal, was suddenly gone. But even as his body hit the floor, something about it never felt right. The streets mourned, the fans questioned, and Tommy, his brother in crime and in blood, walked away without looking back. Yet, deep down, there was always a feeling that Ghost wasn't the kind of man to die without a plan. He was too calculated, too aware of every angle. Death, for a man like Ghost, wasn't an ending, it was an opportunity. After his death, everyone moved differently. Tariq became harder, colder, almost like he was following in his father's footsteps. Tasha disappeared behind lies and survival instincts. But the one person who truly broke was Tommy. The anger, the confusion, the way he left New York, it all pointed to something deeper. Some said he ran because he couldn't handle losing his brother. But others, they think he knew something. Maybe Tommy left because he couldn't carry the truth. Maybe the truth was too dangerous to speak. Every story told about Ghost's death feels clean, like it was written to tie loose ends. But Power never did clean. There's always a mess, always a twist buried in plain sight. From the moment Ghost's body was shown, there were clues, subtle hints that things didn't add up. No official funeral, no body seen by his family, no DNA confirmation that the man in that casket was truly him. And even the way the police handled the case felt off, like someone powerful was pulling strings from behind the curtain, making sure Ghost's death looked final, while something much bigger was happening in silence. Then, out of nowhere, whispers began spreading, online rumors of a letter written by Ghost himself. A letter that Tommy was meant to receive. Not an apology, not a goodbye, but a message filled with words that sounded too deliberate, too controlled, like Ghost knew exactly what was coming. Fans started piecing together timelines, screenshots, and leaked dialogues from Power Book 2 and Power Book 4, Force. The deeper you looked, the clearer it became. This letter wasn't just a farewell, it was a signal. People forget that Ghost was always 2 steps ahead. He wasn't just running clubs. He was orchestrating chess moves on the streets, in politics, even in his own family. He planned everything, every betrayal, every sacrifice. So, is it really impossible to think he planned his own exit too? Think about it. The man who escaped death countless times, outsmarted enemies, faked emotions, and manipulated entire organizations. Why would his final move be so predictable? Why would he allow himself to die so simply? The truth is, Ghost never did anything simple. As time passed, the Power universe expanded, but the shadow of Ghost remained. In every show, every spin-off, his presence lingers like unfinished business. Tommy's silence, Tariq's transformation, and even the way new characters talk about him, it's almost like Ghost's story isn't over. And now, this letter, this one piece of writing that's supposedly from beyond the grave, might be the missing piece that explains everything. What if Ghost didn't die because he couldn't survive, but because he had to disappear? The idea sounds crazy, but so does everything Ghost has ever done. The man who faked loyalty, emotions, and trust could easily fake a death. Maybe that gunshot wasn't an execution. Maybe it was an illusion. Maybe Ghost didn't fall. Maybe he escaped. Because if this letter is real, it doesn't sound like the words of a dead man. It sounds like the beginning of something Ghost has been planning all along. And the first person he wanted to know was Tommy. It started with silence. Weeks turned into months after Ghost's supposed death, and Tommy vanished from New York without a trace. He left behind the chaos, the blood, and the ghosts of every mistake he and James St. Patrick had ever made. But somewhere between anger and grief, something began to haunt him. Not Ghost's memory, but a question. Why did it all feel unfinished? Tommy had always known Ghost like the back of his hand. He could read him in a room full of lies. And the Ghost, Tommy remembered, wasn't the kind of man to die without leaving a message behind. Then one night, buried deep in the back of a rundown garage in Chicago, Tommy found something that didn't belong. It was a worn, sealed envelope inside a box that had been moved across cities. No address, no name, just a symbol. A faint G carved into the corner, written in Ghost's sharp, deliberate handwriting. That single mark stopped Tommy in his tracks. The air shifted. Every memory of their past came flooding back. Their loyalty, their betrayal. And that last night when Ghost looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You're my brother," Always. For the first time since Ghost's death, Tommy felt that same chill again. The envelope was aged, slightly burned on one edge, like it had been hidden somewhere dangerous. Tommy didn't open it right away. He poured himself a drink, stared at it for hours, afraid of what it might say, or what it might prove. When he finally tore it open, his hands were trembling. Inside, there was one folded sheet of paper, written in Ghost's clean, business-like handwriting. The ink was smudged, like it had been written in a rush, or maybe under stress. The first line read, "If you're reading this, it means everything went according to plan." Tommy froze. His heart pounded. Plan. That single word flipped his entire world upside down. Ghost had planned everything. Tommy read on. And the letter unfolded like a confession and a riddle all at once. Ghost wrote about being cornered but not defeated. He spoke of enemies too powerful to fight directly, of debts that couldn't be repaid in life. Sometimes, the letter said, to win the game, you have to take yourself off the board. Tommy could barely breathe. Every line sounded like Ghost, cold, strategic, but with a strange sense of peace. He mentioned people by code names, places that only they would understand. One part stood out. When they think I'm gone, I can finally move the way I need to. Trust no one except what I've already told you. Tommy's hand gripped the paper tighter. It wasn't just a letter, it was a map. The letter even hinted that someone inside law enforcement had helped Ghost vanish. There were subtle references to a favor owed from the inside and a clean disappearance. Tommy remembered the way the feds had handled Ghost's case. No real body, no pictures leaked, just quick reports and a closed file. Everything about it screamed setup. Ghost always talked about control. This letter sounded like he had found a way to control even death itself. But what shook Tommy the most wasn't the plan, it was the tone. Ghost wasn't writing like a man saying goodbye. He was writing like a man preparing for a second act. He wrote, "Tell no one. They can't protect what they can't see." The last line made Tommy's hands shake. "When the city burns again, you'll know I'm close." Tommy read it over and over, trying to make sense of it. Could Ghost really be alive? Could he have faked his death just to disappear from the game and rebuild in silence? Tommy's first instinct was rage. He'd grieved, he'd lost everything, and Ghost had been alive this whole time. But then came understanding. If anyone could pull off something like this, it was Ghost. The man played life like chess. He thought 3 steps ahead, and even his mistakes had purpose. Tommy knew he couldn't talk to anyone about it. If the letter was real, and everything in him said it was, then opening his mouth could destroy the plan Ghost had risked everything to make. So he burned the envelope, memorized every word, and walked out of that garage like he'd seen a ghost. From that night on, Tommy's path changed. The vengeance in his eyes turned into determination. His war in Chicago wasn't just about taking territory anymore. He was looking for signs, clues, messages, anything that proved Ghost was still out there watching. And as Tommy began moving through the streets again, whispers followed him, strangers mentioning a man who looked like Ghost in another city, a quiet investor buying properties under a fake name, rumors of someone who moves like St. Patrick. Tommy didn't believe in ghosts, but this time, he wanted to, because now he knew Ghost's story wasn't finished. That letter wasn't closure, it was the beginning of something bigger, something hidden beneath every spin-off, every whispered name, every unfinished war. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of Power's world, Ghosts might still be pulling strings, waiting for the right time to return. Every word Ghost ever said carried a double edge. One for the world to hear and one only a few could understand. The letter Tommy found wasn't just writing on paper, it was Ghost's final game board. He never spoke directly. He layered meaning under meaning, truth under lies. The more Tommy reread that letter, the more it became clear Ghost wasn't saying goodbye. He was teaching Tommy how to see beyond the surface, how to follow his shadow. The line that started it all, "If you're reading this, it means everything went according to plan," felt like a confession. But what plan? Ghost had always talked about control, how he hated chaos, how he wanted power over every piece of his life. That sentence sounded like victory, not surrender. It was as if Ghost was saying that his death wasn't an accident or punishment, it was execution of the plan itself. Tommy began to realize Ghost might not have died at all. He removed himself. Then there was the second part. Sometimes, to win the game, you have to take yourself off the board. Those words carried the weight of his entire character arc. Ghost had been hunted by everyone, cops, rivals, even his own son. He knew his name was too powerful to just fade quietly. So, what if his death wasn't about running from enemies, but about escaping the cage his own identity built around him. Ghost wasn't dying. He was transforming. He was resetting the game. Every phrase in that letter was written like a code. The board could mean the city, New York, the empire he built, the streets he ruled. Taking yourself off the board could mean faking death to become untouchable. In power, Ghost was obsessed with perception. He always said, "If people believe you're gone, you can move however you want." That line wasn't fiction anymore. It was his reality. Tommy fixated on another strange part of the letter. When they think I'm gone, I can finally move the way I need to. That sounded like liberation, not regret. The tone wasn't one of fear or panic. It was cold, deliberate, and full of intention. Ghost was freeing himself from the expectations, the eyes, and the enemies. Death was the one disguise no one could challenge. Then came the line that haunted Tommy. "Trust no one except what I've already told you." It didn't say who to trust, only what. That difference mattered. Ghost might have been pointing Tommy toward something more concrete, an instruction, a location, or even a backup plan he'd hinted at years before. Tommy started remembering their old conversations. Ghost's obsession with legacy, and his cryptic talk about building something that lasts beyond me. Maybe this was it. Maybe Ghost had built his own afterlife in plain sight, a network, a business, or even a hidden identity waiting for the right time to resurface. There was also a peculiar line that read, "A favor owed from the inside will pay its price soon." Tommy didn't understand it at first, but thinking about Ghost's connections, politicians, law enforcement, and even people in witness protection, it clicked. Ghost had leverage everywhere. What if he'd made a deal with someone inside the system? Someone who helped him vanish clean. Ghost had always been more connected than anyone realized. That line hinted at help from the inside. Someone who could make him disappear without leaving a trace. But the final line of the letter was the one that froze. Tommy's blood. "When the city burns again, you'll know I'm close." It wasn't metaphorical, it was a promise. Ghost was saying he'd return when chaos rose again. The phrase "city burns" could symbolize another power struggle, another war on the streets, maybe even something involving Tariq. Ghost had always said the city was alive. It breathed. It fed on power. So when the city started burning, it meant the game had restarted. That's when he'd make his move. Every hidden message connected back to Ghost's nature, control, strategy, timing. He wasn't a man who left things unfinished. And this letter sounded like unfinished business disguised as closure. If Ghost truly died, the tone would have been softer, more emotional. But instead, it was sharp. Tactical, like a set of instructions left for someone he trusted to carry out his legacy. Tommy couldn't ignore the patterns anymore. He started looking back at the people Ghost left behind, Tariq, Tasha, even the enemies he supposedly lost to. Each one was still alive, still moving, still fighting. It was almost as if Ghost had left them in place like pieces of a puzzle. Everyone had a role, even if they didn't know it. Tariq becoming what his father once was. Tommy surviving and taking over new cities. Every outcome felt intentional. Like Ghost was still directing it from the shadows. And when you think about it, Ghost's entire philosophy revolved around one idea. You can't kill what's already become a legend. That's exactly what this letter proved. Ghost didn't want to be remembered as a man. He wanted to be remembered as a myth. Untouchable, unbreakable, unforgettable. Death gave him exactly that now. The question isn't whether Ghost faked his death. It's how far ahead he planned it. The clues hidden in the letter aren't just words. They're coordinates, triggers, signals waiting to be activated. And Tommy, whether he admits it or not, is the key. Ghost knew Tommy would never stop searching, never stop asking questions. That's why he left the letter for him, not to bring closure, but to reopen the story. Because in Ghost's world, death isn't the end of power. It's the ultimate illusion. And somewhere out there, in the silence between truth and myth, James St. Patrick might still be playing the long game, one move away from returning to reclaim everything he lost. Tommy Egan had always been a man of impulse, a ticking bomb wrapped in loyalty and rage. But after discovering Ghost's letter, something inside him changed. The fire that once burned with anger now glowed with purpose. Every word Ghost wrote became a map in his mind, leading him through the darkness he thought he'd never escape. For the first time since his brother's death, Tommy wasn't just fighting to survive, he was searching for something that could rewrite the story everyone thought was over. He began retracing Ghost's steps, old business partners, hidden accounts, abandoned warehouses. All of it suddenly made sense in a way it never had before. Ghost had left traces, not obvious ones, but breadcrumbs for the one man smart enough and loyal enough to follow. Tommy's instincts, The same instincts that made him dangerous were now pulling him towards something bigger. He started seeing patterns in places no one else could. Money being moved quietly under old St. Patrick's shell companies. Properties in Chicago bought under fake names. Even whispers on the street about a man running operations like Ghost used to. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to light a fuse in Tommy's mind. And then came the coincidences. The kind Ghost used to call moves. Rivals who suddenly went missing. Cops who looked the other way when they shouldn't have. People who owed Ghost favors showing up in new cities. Working under new names. It was like watching invisible hands rearrange the board again. The game was alive. Tommy could feel it. Every instinct told him Ghost was out there, maybe not in plain sight, but close enough to pull strings. That last line of the letter, "When the city burns again, you'll know I'm close," started replaying in his head every night. And then the city did start to burn. Wars erupted across corners of Chicago. New players rose up. Old alliances broke apart. And suddenly Tommy found himself standing in the middle of chaos, the kind of chaos Ghost used to control. It didn't feel random. It felt planned. It felt like a signal. Tommy's nights became consumed by this thought that Ghost was alive, somewhere, watching. He started moving differently, more calculated, more measured. Every decision he made carried weight, as if he was preparing for a meeting that hadn't been announced yet. People around him noticed it too. He wasn't the reckless soldier anymore. He was becoming something else, something Ghost would have recognized. It was almost poetic. In trying to find his brother, Tommy was becoming him. But the deeper Tommy dug, the more he began to understand why Ghosts might have chosen to disappear. The letter hinted at power too costly to hold on to, and now Tommy knew what that meant. The world Ghost had built had become too heavy for one man to control. Too many enemies, too many eyes, too much truth to keep hidden. By faking his death, Ghost didn't just escape, he reset the entire system. He let everyone else fight for the scraps, while he built something new from the shadows. And here's the craziest part. The clues didn't just stop at the letter. There were digital footprints, a security camera glitch in Queens right after Ghost's supposed burial, an offshore account opened under a name that translated to James in another language, even an anonymous donation made to the foundation Ghost once promised to start. Tommy didn't believe in ghosts, but this was too much to be coincidence. It was as if Ghost had left little fingerprints on the world, testing if anyone would notice. And Tommy did. As the chaos around him grew, Tommy realized the letter wasn't just about revealing the truth, it was about preparing him for what came next. Ghost wasn't asking Tommy to find him. He was preparing him to take over until the time was right. The letter said, "Trust what I've already told you." And Tommy finally understood. Ghost had trained him his entire life to think like him, move like him, and, when the moment came, lead like him. Tommy wasn't just looking for Ghost anymore. He was keeping his legacy alive. Still, part of him couldn't let go of the idea that Ghost was out there, orchestrating everything from afar. Maybe he was using a new name, a new face, a new life. Maybe he was the man behind the quiet deals shaping the streets again. Tommy started hearing whispers about a silent investor funding movements across different states. Smart, quiet, invisible, the kind of player only Ghost could be. One night, after a long day of settling a new score, Tommy returned to his car. On the passenger seat was a folded piece of paper. No envelope this time, just a note. For words,